Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Tonight, I want to take you on a journey into the life of a man who could not walk, who could not speak, yet moved the minds of millions. This is not just the story of science. It is the story of courage, of imagination, and of a human spirit that refused to break. When Stephen Hawking looked at the stars, he did not see cold, empty space. He saw questions. He saw mysteries waiting to be solved. And with nothing but his mind, he reached further than most of us can even dream. So stay with me, because Stephen's life will remind you of one truth. Even when the body is weak, the mind can shine brighter than the stars. Stephen William Hawking was born on January 8, 1942 in Oxford, England. It was a special date, exactly 300 years after the death of Galileo Galilei, one of the greatest scientists in history. Some would later say this was destiny, that Stephen too was born to change the way humanity sees the universe. Stephen's parents, Frank and Isabel Hawking, were both thinkers. His father was a respected medical researcher. His mother was a bright, independent woman who loved education and reading. They were not rich, but they were deeply curious about the world. At dinner, the family often sat in silence, each person with a book in hand, lost in thought. Stephen grew up in a home filled with books, questions, and ideas. This atmosphere gave him permission to dream big and to think differently from other children. From the very beginning, Stephen was curious. He wanted to know how things worked. Why does the clock tick? Why does the sun shine? Why do stars fill the sky? His teachers, however, did not always see this curiosity as a gift. He was not the neatest student. His handwriting was poor. He was slow in some school exercises. One teacher even described him as lazy. But Stephen's mind was sharp. He loved puzzles and problems that no one else wanted to solve. Other children sometimes laughed at him, calling him Einstein as a joke. What they didn't know was that this nickname would one day become almost true. At St. Albans School, Stephen was not strong in sports or practical tasks. He was clumsy, often last to finish physical activities. But when it came to numbers, logic, or imagination, he excelled. He built model trains. He designed imaginary board games with complex rules. And he dreamed about flying into space. Stephen's parents encouraged him to be independent and original. His father wanted him to study medicine, to follow the family path. But Stephen had other ideas. He loved mathematics. He loved physics. He wanted to understand the universe itself, not just the human body. His mother, Isabel, supported him. She often told him, "Stephen, look up at the stars, not down at your feet." This advice became one of the guiding principles of his life. Even as a boy, Stephen was fascinated by the vastness of the cosmos. He wondered, how did it all begin? Does it ever end? What lies beyond the stars we can see? At age 17, Stephen won a place at the University of Oxford, one of the most prestigious schools in the world. He was young, shy, and uncertain about his future. At first, he felt out of place. Oxford was full of brilliant minds, and Stephen worried that he wasn't good enough, but slowly he found his rhythm. He studied physics, the subject he loved most. He spent hours reading, thinking, and debating big questions. How does time work? What is the nature of space? Where does the universe come from? Stephen was not the hardest worker at Oxford. In fact, he once admitted that he only studied about 1 hour a day in his first years, but his natural intelligence was so strong that he still achieved high marks. He learned to balance work with fun. He joined the rowing team, not as a rower, but as a coxswain, the person who steers the boat and shouts commands. This gave him confidence, friends, and a sense of belonging. Oxford also shaped his character. It was here that he began to realize his true passion was not just physics, but cosmology, the study of the universe as a whole. But as his curiosity and confidence grew, something else began to happen. Something darker. Stephen noticed that his body was not as strong as before. He tripped while walking. His speech sometimes slurred. He could no longer row or move as easily as his friends. At first, he ignored the signs. He thought he was simply clumsy, but the problems grew. His parents worried. Doctors began to run tests. The news that came was devastating. Stephen was diagnosed with ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, a disease that slowly weakens the muscles and destroys the ability to move. He was just 21 years old. The doctors told him he might only live 2 more years. Imagine that for a moment. You are young, you are brilliant, your whole life is ahead of you. And then suddenly, you are told that life may soon end. For many, this would be the end of hope. But for Stephen, it was the beginning of something else. It was the moment he decided that if time was short, he would not waste it. He would dedicate every ounce of his mind to the mysteries of the universe. And so, with his body weakening, but his mind sharper than ever, Stephen began the fight of his life. It was not a fight against doctors or against the disease alone. It was a fight against time, against despair, against the limits others placed upon him. What followed was not just survival, it was brilliance. It was a story of love, of science, of laughter, and of discoveries that shook the very foundations of physics. And that is where our journey now turns. At Oxford, Stephen Hawking faced a new world. He was just 17, one of the youngest students there. Oxford was full of brilliant minds, yet Stephen quickly stood out. Not because he was the loudest, not because he was the strongest, but because he had a quiet way of seeing patterns where others only saw chaos. At first, Stephen felt lost. He didn't study as hard as some of his classmates. He even admitted later that he only worked seriously for about 1 hour a day during his early years. But that 1 hour was enough. His mind was quick, his memory sharp, and his curiosity endless. He enjoyed rowing with the college boat club, even though he was not physically strong. Rowing gave him friends, laughter, and moments away from equations, but life was about to change. During his final year at Oxford, Stephen began to notice something strange. He would trip while walking, his speech sometimes slurred. His hands trembled when he tried to button his shirt. At first, he ignored it. He thought it was clumsiness. He told himself he was just tired. But the symptoms grew worse. When Stephen entered Cambridge for his graduate studies in cosmology, the problem followed him. Doctors began running tests. The truth came like a storm. Stephen was diagnosed with ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It was a disease that slowly destroyed the nerves controlling muscles. The doctors told him he might only live 2 more years. Imagine being 21, your future just opening, and then being told it will all soon end. For a while, Stephen fell into despair. He avoided people. He stopped studying. He felt like his dreams were collapsing before they even had a chance to rise. But life gave him something to hold on to, Jane Wilde. She was a student he had met before his diagnosis. Jane believed in him, cared for him, and loved him, despite his illness. Her presence gave Stephen hope. Later, he would say that without Jane, he might not have found the will to continue. Slowly, Stephen returned to his work. He realized that while his body was weakening, his mind remained free. If he only had a short time left, he wanted to use it well. He wanted to explore the universe itself. At Cambridge, Stephen studied under Dennis Sciama, one of the leading physicists of the time. He focused on black holes and the origin of the universe. He asked questions that few dared to ask. What happens at the center of a black hole? Does time have a beginning, or does it go back forever? Even as walking became harder, even as speaking became slower, his mind seemed to grow stronger. His fellow students began to notice his brilliance. He had a way of simplifying complex problems, cutting straight to the heart of the mystery. Then came one of his most famous contributions. In 1974, Stephen proposed that black holes are not completely black. They emit tiny amounts of radiation, now known as Hawking radiation. This idea shocked the scientific world. It connected the laws of quantum mechanics with the laws of gravity, two areas of physics that often seemed impossible to unite. The discovery was revolutionary. For the first time, scientists had to rethink the very nature of black holes. And all of this came from a young man who could barely walk and was slowly losing his voice. Stephen was not working alone. Jane became his partner in every sense. They married in 1965 and started a family together. She helped him with daily life, cared for him as his disease advanced, and encouraged him to keep pursuing science. Together, they proved that love and determination could create miracles. But challenges grew heavier. By the late 1970s, Stephen could no longer walk without support. He used a wheelchair. His speech became harder to understand. Communicating with others took patience. Yet, his fame was rising. He was invited to conferences. Other scientists wanted to hear his ideas. They struggled to understand his words, but they listened carefully, because each sentence carried brilliance. One turning point came in the 1980s. Stephen caught pneumonia, and doctors performed a tracheotomy to save his life. The surgery left him unable to speak at all. For most people, this would have been the end of communication, but for Stephen, it was the beginning of a new chapter. Engineers created a special speech-generating device for him. With a small movement of his cheek, he could select words on a screen. A computer voice, robotic but clear, would then speak for him. This voice became famous. It was not natural, but it was uniquely his. Through it, Stephen continued to lecture, to write, and to inspire millions. Instead of silence, the world now heard him louder than ever. His voice, though artificial, carried authority and warmth. It became a symbol of persistence, of refusing to give up, of turning limitation into strength. By now, Stephen's reputation had spread far beyond Cambridge. He was known not only for his scientific theories, but also for his courage. Students admired him. Scientists debated him. The public began to see him as a symbol of hope. Here was a man trapped in a failing body, yet free in the vast universe of his mind. Stephen once said, "My goal is simple. It is a complete understanding of the universe, why it is as it is, and why it exists at all." These words summed up his mission, a mission that would carry him into the next stage of his life. Because even though his illness continued to progress, Stephen Hawking was just getting started. His books, his lectures, and his ideas would soon reach millions outside the world of science. The boy once called Einstein as a joke was about to become one of the most recognized thinkers on Earth. By the mid-1980s, Stephen Hawking was already famous among scientists, but soon his name would spread far beyond universities and laboratories. The man in the wheelchair, with the robotic voice, became a global icon. His disease continued to progress. He needed assistance for nearly every daily task. And yet, his mind never slowed down. In fact, it seemed to fly faster, reaching further than ever before. In 1988, he published a book that would change his life, A Brief History of Time. The book explained deep questions about the universe in a way ordinary people could understand. How did the universe begin? Does time have a beginning? What happens inside a black hole? For many, these were mysteries too big to imagine, but Stephen's clear explanations made them accessible. To everyone's surprise, the book became a bestseller. It stayed on the Sunday Times list for over 4 years. Millions of copies were sold in dozens of languages. Stephen, who could barely move or speak, had reached into homes across the world. Families, students, and dreamers were reading about the cosmos, guided by his words. The success of A Brief History of Time turned Stephen into a celebrity. He appeared on television. He gave lectures to huge audiences. He even guest starred in shows like The Simpsons and Star Trek. His computer voice, once a necessity, became part of his identity. People recognized it instantly. But behind the fame was the same quiet determination. Stephen never pretended his life was easy. He admitted there were times of deep frustration. Yet he always returned to one simple belief: as long as there is life, there is hope. This belief shaped everything he did. He kept pushing science forward. He wrote more books, each one reaching new readers. He traveled, gave talks, and shared his vision of humanity's future. Even as his physical abilities faded, his influence grew brighter. Stephen also became a voice on issues beyond physics. He warned the world about climate change, artificial intelligence, and the dangers of nuclear war. He believed humanity must take responsibility for its survival. He often said that if humans wanted to last for thousands of years, we must explore space. The Earth, he believed, was too fragile to hold us forever. His words carried weight because they came not only from a scientist, but from a man who had faced death for decades. When Stephen spoke, people listened. At the same time, his personal life was filled with ups and downs. His marriage to Jane ended after 25 years. Caring for Stephen had been an enormous challenge, and the strain eventually broke their bond. Later, he remarried, but that relationship also ended in difficulty. Still, through it all, he remained a loving father to his children. They often said that despite his fame at home, he was simply Dad, a father who encouraged curiosity and imagination, just as his own mother had once encouraged him. Stephen's later years were a mix of brilliance and fragility. He required more medical care, but he never stopped working. In 2010, he published The Grand Design, a bold book suggesting that the universe could exist without the need for a creator. The idea sparked debates worldwide, but Stephen was not afraid of controversy. For him, asking questions, even uncomfortable ones, was the essence of science. He also inspired people with humor. Despite his illness, he often made jokes. Once he said, "I have had the privilege of being married to two wonderful women, and I believe this has greatly increased my understanding of the universe." Audiences laughed not only at the joke, but at the courage of a man who refused to let sadness define him. In 2014, his life was portrayed in the film The Theory of Everything. The movie showed his struggles and triumphs, and it touched millions. For many people, this was their first glimpse of the human being behind the genius. They saw the love, the pain, the perseverance, and the brilliance. By the final years of his life, Stephen was not only a scientist, but a symbol of what the human spirit could endure. A symbol of how the mind can shine even when the body fails. A symbol of turning weakness into strength. On March 14, 2018, Stephen Hawking passed away at the age of 76. The date was striking. It was Pi Day, a celebration of mathematics. It was also the birthday of Albert Einstein, the man whose name Stephen had been teased with as a child. It felt almost poetic, as if the universe itself had chosen the day. His death was mourned across the globe. World leaders, scientists, students, and ordinary people all paid tribute. But more than sadness, there was gratitude. Gratitude for a life that had taught us so much. Gratitude for a man who showed that while the body may fail, the mind can reach the stars. Stephen once said, "Remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet." It was his way of reminding us not to be trapped by our limits, but to keep dreaming. Because even when life feels heavy, there is always something greater above us. Today, his legacy lives on in science, in books, and in the hearts of millions. He left us formulas, theories, and ideas. But more importantly, he left us courage. The courage to adapt. The courage to dream. The courage to keep moving forward when everything seems impossible. And so, as we close his story, let us carry his message with us. While there is life, there is hope. While there is curiosity, there is discovery. And while there is determination, there is no limit to what the human spirit can achieve. Stephen Hawking's body was bound to a chair, but his mind traveled across galaxies. His words continue to echo, not just in classrooms and labs, but in the hearts of everyone who dares to dream. And perhaps, when we look at the night sky, we will remember him, not as a man trapped by illness, but as a voice that reminded humanity of its greatest gift, the power to wonder. And that brings us to the end of Stephen Hawking's incredible journey. His story reminds us that no matter the challenge, the human spirit can shine brighter than any star. If you enjoyed this story and learned something new, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with friends who also love learning English through stories. Every week we bring you more inspiring lives and powerful lessons. So stay curious, keep practicing, and remember, your mind has no limits. See you in the next story.